All right, guys, it's never too early to talk about next season. So today we're going to be looking at 10 sleeper college football playoff candidates for next season. I think all of these teams have a favorable schedule and have enough people coming back to where they could make some noise in the playoff. Some of them are borderline sleepers, you know what I mean? Like they're probably going to be good, but are they going to be college football playoff worthy? That's why I consider them a sleeper because I think every one of these teams realistically, if all falls right, could have a chance at making the playoff. So let's go ahead and start here. We're going to start with Syracuse. You should be able to see their schedule on your screen now. Let me scroll down so you can see it instead of this guy vacuuming. All right, so Syracuse, first off, they've got a lot of good transfers coming in. New head coach Fran Brown, one of the best recruiters in the nation, coming over from Georgia. DB's coach at Georgia, number one recruiter, brings in a couple receivers with him from Georgia, brings in Ohio State quarterback Kyle McCord. I think they've got a legit shot here. So let's break it down a little bit. Ohio, that's a win. Holy Cross, win. UConn, win. I think this is their only loss right here. NC State, you may see them a little later on here. That's a win. That one's going to be tough, but that's a win. Let's see. Miami, that one also going to be tough, but I think that's a win. Stanford, that's a win. Virginia Tech's going to be tough, but I think it's a win. So you've got a for sure loss probably against NC State. Then you got a couple toss-up games, I would say Georgia Tech, Miami, Virginia Tech. Nowadays, with the expanded playoff going to 12 teams, you can still make the playoff by losing a game or two. And if they only lose to NC State, Syracuse could make it. They avoid Florida State. They avoid Clemson. It's a pretty nice schedule. It might lay out pretty nicely for them. All right, next up, we've got Iowa. All right, I know their offense is terrible. It's abysmal. But let's talk about that defense, and let's talk about that schedule. Okay, so first off, at quarterback, they've got Cade McNamara coming back from injury last year. The Michigan transfer took Michigan to a playoff. All right, so he's a good quarterback. He was injured last year, but he's all right now. So you've got that kind of settled. All right, but then their schedule. So, like I said, they avoid Oregon. They avoid Michigan. So that's really two key opponents that you're not playing. You also avoid Penn State. So let's look at it here. Illinois State should be a win. Iowa State, that one's going to be tough because it's a rivalry game. You know, that's never easy. But I think they'll beat Iowa State next year. I think Cade McNamara is pretty good. Troy, that's a win. They lose their head coach, John Summerall. They're not going to be near as good. Minnesota, that's a win. Ohio State, that's going to be a loss. Ohio State's loading up. Probably going to be your preseason top 2 or 3 team. They're loading up in the portal. Washington currently has them at 11 on here, but they're losing a bunch with DeBoer leaving. I always struggle saying his name for some reason. But with DeBoer leaving to Alabama, Washington probably about to be on Exodus watch. They're going to lose most of their players. They were already losing a ton anyway. But I think Iowa can beat Washington. Michigan State, I think that'll be a win. Northwestern, that'll be a win. Wisconsin, not going to be easy, but I think that'll be a win. Wisconsin, Luke Fickell will get them back on track, but I don't think he gets them there yet. UCLA should be a win. Chip Kelly's kind of struggling at UCLA here lately. Maryland, I think that's a win. Nebraska, I think that's a win. So you're looking at an Iowa team with 1 loss, and let's say for your argument's sake, 2 losses. A 2-loss Big Ten team is still making the playoff with how this expanded playoff is. But I think they're going to go in with 1 loss against Ohio State, and I think Iowa could make the playoff. Next up, let's see, Virginia Tech. All right, Virginia Tech returns a ton next season. I've got a few ACC teams on there for that reason. There's a lot of teams that have that going for them. But Virginia Tech, if you watch them at all during their bowl game, their quarterback is really impressive. So let's start here. Vanderbilt, that's a win. Marshall, that's a win. Old Dominion, that's a win. Rutgers, going to be very tough. You might see Rutgers here in a little bit, actually. I think that's kind of a toss-up game, but for argument's sake here, we'll say Virginia Tech gets the win. Virginia, that's a win. Duke, that's going to be a win. They lost their coach Elko to A&M. They're not going to be the same team. Miami, Florida, not going to be easy, but I think you can win that game. Stanford, that's a win. Syracuse, we talked about them earlier. For argument's sake, for a lot of these teams, we're going to assume that the games that are 50-50, such as this one and the Miami game, I'm going to give them the win just because I think it is a realistic possibility they could beat these teams. But then when Syracuse should be a good matchup. Let's give Virginia Tech the win here. Boston College, that's a win. Clemson, that's going to be a loss. Georgia Tech, going to be tough too, but let's say it's a win. All right, so besides Clemson here, you don't really see any unwinnable games. And if all falls right for Virginia Tech, you could see them making the playoff. All right, next up here. All right, speaking of that team, Rutgers, okay? So they have a favorable schedule as well. Let's go ahead and get into it here. All right, you've got Howard, win. Akron, win. Virginia Tech, going to be tough, but let's give them the win here. Washington, like I said, Washington is about to drop tremendously. But look at the rest of the schedule. All right, so for a Big Ten school, who are the top 4 teams probably you're thinking next year that could win the Big Ten? Because let's take Washington out of the picture. They're not going to be the same team. You've got Ohio State, you've got Oregon, you've got Michigan, you've got Penn State. Guess what? Rutgers does not play any of those teams, which means Rutgers has a legit shot here to potentially going undefeated, to be honest with you. They could even lose a game to USC, Wisconsin, Washington, Virginia Tech, whoever. They could even drop one game and still make the playoff. Looking at their schedule here, it plays out very nicely for Rutgers to make a run. They've got their running back coming back, led the Big Ten in rushing last season. They've got their quarterback coming back. Rutgers under Greg Schiano is always pretty competitive, but I think they could make a run next year. All right, next up here, NC State. All right, so this one I considered not putting on here because I don't consider them a sleeper, but I think most people will. I think they're a lock for the college football playoff next year. These other teams are all kind of iffy. I mean, they need a few things to go right. NC State, I firmly believe, is going to be in the playoff. I think I had them at whenever I did my way too early playoff predictions, I think I had them as the 4 seed in the playoff. So they're going to be in, I think, for sure. But let's break down their schedule a little bit. Western Carolina, that's a dub. Tennessee, I think NC State's going to be better in Tennessee next year. They have loaded up in the portal. They've already been pretty competitive under Dave Doran, but you bring in Coastal Carolina quarterback Grayson McCall, and he's won a ton of ball games at Coastal Carolina. You also bring in a ton of other transfers. I think NC State is going to be legit next year. All right, but moving along, Louisiana Tech, that's a win. NIU, that's a win. Cal, that's a win. Clemson, going to be tough. We'll give them a loss here, okay, because I think Clemson is going to be legit, but NC State's going to be good, though, so that's a 50-50 game, I think. But we'll give them a loss here. Georgia Tech, that's a win. Duke, that's a win. Stanford, that's a win. Syracuse win. Wake Forest win. North Carolina win. So you avoid Florida State here. I think at most one loss here to Clemson. Other than that, I think they're winning every game, and that would give you the chance to kind of avenge that loss, which I think they will do. My prediction is they'll lose to Clemson in the regular season, beat them in the ACC championship, and then make the playoff. All right, next team here, Appalachian State. I think I missed a team on here that should be on this list. I'll add them within. Let me go ahead and do that before I forget. After this one, I'll do it. All right, so Appalachian State here. All right, besides Clemson, they have a very winnable schedule. I don't think they're going to beat Clemson, but they should be able to give them a game. Their quarterback's coming back. Appalachian State's is, and he's pretty freaking good. Look into him a little bit. Look up their quarterback. He can play. He puts up some impressive numbers. But East Carolina, that's a win. ETSU, that's a win. I know I'm out of order here. Clemson, I think that's a loss. Liberty, not going to be easy. But if you can beat Liberty and only have a loss to Clemson, that might put you in the playoff now because there's an automatic bid for the group of 5. And looking at the rest of these numbers here, I don't see a loss coming. Let me pull up this next team before I forget them real quick. All right, so next team I'm going to be talking about here is Memphis. Okay, for some reason I skipped them on my board here. But I think Memphis is probably going to be the representative for the group of 5 next season. Let's pull up their schedule here. I don't know what just happened. Oh, my gosh, guys. I'm losing y'all. Don't leave just yet. I just screwed this up completely. There we go. Should be able to see it now. Okay, so pardon the technical difficulties. Still getting used to this Mac life. All right, so Memphis, I think, is going to be your group of 5 representative in the college football playoff next year. Besides Florida State, they're about to run this conference in the American. You look at how they did last year. They didn't have any bad losses this season. They lost to, I think, SMU, but they only lost to 7 points to Missouri this season. And Missouri was a really good team, beat Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. And when you're barely losing to Missouri, you're doing something right. Florida State's not going to be the same team next year. I think Memphis can beat them. Other than that, though, like I said, all of these teams are losing that were impressive or losing guys. So like Tulane, for example, they've lost their coach. Or they've got a new coach coming in from Troy, which they also play. But every other team, SMU, they're gone to the ACC. This is a very winnable American for Memphis, and I think they can even beat Florida State. They've got their quarterback coming back as well, Henigan. They're talking about Memphis. They're going to be impressive next year. I think they'll be a top 10 team next year by the season's end. All right, next up here we have USC. All right, USC I know is a talked about team, but Lincoln Riley, I know he's been getting a lot of crap lately for how USC's been, and they were bad this season, admittedly. I thought they'd be a really good team this year. They were not, even with Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley. But you got Miller Moss, probably your next quarterback. You've got a favorable schedule here, which we'll get into in a second. Besides, okay, you play LSU at the beginning of the year. That's not easy. I said favorable, but LSU loses Daniels. They lost 3 games this year. They're not going to be the same team. I think they're beatable, and I think USC could win that game and beat LSU. Utah State, that's a win. Michigan is not going to be easy, but think of it this way. I think once Harbaugh is gone, I'm pretty sure he's going to take a pro job. He's supposedly interviewing with the Chargers next week. I think that means J.J. McCarthy's gone, and then the max exodus begins of people just transferring out. But you've got Michigan and Penn State and Washington. You avoid, in my opinion, the top 2 teams in the Big Ten Conference next year, Oregon and Ohio State. I think they can beat Michigan once everybody transfers out. So let's go ahead and give them a win there. I think they can beat Michigan. All right, Wisconsin, they can beat Wisconsin. Minnesota, they can beat Minnesota. I think they'll lose to Penn State, but I think every other game here they're going to win. All right, I think they'll beat Maryland. I think they'll beat Rutgers. I think they'll beat Washington. I think they'll beat Nebraska. I think they'll beat UCLA. So the tough one here is Notre Dame. All right, I said favorable schedule. I'm kind of having regrets there. But they do have a tough schedule, but I think USC is going to be better next season. Notre Dame, we'll give them a loss here, but I think even with 2 losses, if that's to Penn State and Notre Dame, I have both of them in the playoff now. That puts USC right on that cut line of should they get in, should they not. They're getting the argument there, I think. All right, next up here we've got Miami. All right, so Miami, it's going to depend on who they can end up pulling in at quarterback. They're still going to have a transfer coming in at quarterback, I firmly believe. They're losing Tyler Van Dyke. We know Mario Cristobal can recruit, so he can bring in some talent there. But who's going to run the offense? All right, you lose, like I said, Tyler Van Dyke to Wisconsin. I think they've got probably their quarterbacks down to 2 options. I would say Talia Tagovailoa from Maryland or Cam Ward. He's not signed with an agent yet, Washington State transfer. He did declare for the draft, but hasn't signed with an agent. Wouldn't be surprised if he pulls his name back out and goes to Miami. So let's say they get one of those guys. All right. Either one, doesn't matter. Florida, that's a win. Florida A&M, that's a win. Ball State, that's a win. USF, win. Cal, win. Georgia Tech, win. Louisville, not going to be easy, but you do have the talent there to beat Louisville. Let's see. Duke, that's a win. Florida State, like I said, I'm down on Florida State next season. I don't think they're going to be as good, so give Miami the win there. Virginia Tech, win. Wake Forest, win. Syracuse is going to be tough, but if Miami can get the right guy at quarterback, they could beat Syracuse. They have the opportunity here, like you can see their schedule now. They have the opportunity to go undefeated or with even 1 loss. And if you have 1 loss, you're not getting left out of the playoff now. There's no way. All right, last but not least here, we have Oklahoma State. Another team I borderline sleeper, kind of similar to NC State. I think the favorites at the moment in the Big 12 are Arizona and Utah. Oklahoma State returns a ton from last year. I know they kind of had ups and downs, got spanked by Texas in the championship, but as much as they return, you know Mike Gundy is going to be consistent. You know he's going to win ball games. They return probably the best running back in the nation, Ollie Gordon. Also return your quarterback, Alan Bowman. I think they've got a legitimate shot here. South Dakota State, that's a win. Arkansas win. Tulsa win. Baylor win. BYU win. Colorado win. Kansas State, they lose Will Howard. I know they played their backup quarterback a lot last year, but that's a winnable ball game there. Arizona State, that's a win. Utah, not going to be easy by any means. It's really going to come down to this last stretch here. Utah's not easy, but you get them at home. That helps having this 3-game stretch at home for sure. Texas Tech is not going to be easy as well, but I think they can beat them. West Virginia is another team I was almost putting on this list, but I decided to go with Oklahoma State instead. I think the winner of that game probably is going to win the Big 12, West Virginia and Oklahoma State. So that's a really important ball game there. But like I said, you can lose 1 ball game now and still make the playoff with how it's playing out. TCU, that's a win. So those are my 10 sleeper teams for next season. There will be another list coming out later down the line once transfer portal is done, once the coaching carousel dominoes are done. I'll put another list out, kind of a more defined, probably a top 5. But let me know who you would add to this list. Let me know who you would take off. Let me know. Comment down below. Make sure to like this video and subscribe.